Hello and welcome to Startup Sessions. At this podcast session, we have a guest, David Lane, kindly accepted my offer to be on this podcast. So David is the founder and managing director at FatFish Digital. I mean, I love the name, but that's not the only thing I love about the business. So I'm really excited to have him as a guest and talk about the story of FatFish, how it manages growth, the people side of things, the technology side of things, and generally hearing what David has to say. So welcome, David. Thank you for being a part of the show.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So the first question I want to ask, I just get down to it and to understand for our listeners out there as well, what FatFish Digital does. So what is the core value proposition of the business?
Sure. Yeah. So we're a technology company. Building out technology solutions, but our big focus is sort of user engagement, sort of understanding how a user interacts with a piece of technology and really optimizing that user engagement and the user journey. So typically a lot of our work is on mobile applications and building mobile apps for consumers. We do some bits for web as well. But I think when we're working with our clients, it's typically not just building a piece of technology, it's really making sure that their end users get the most out of that piece of technology as well.
Oh, I see. And how did you arrive at this point? Has the business gone through any iterations, pivots, or morphs until you've nailed this product market fit?
Yeah, so I think our background in sort of the space has been quite long, actually. So this is my second technology company. So my first company I set up in 2004, and that was building sort of mobile applications. And obviously, if you look at the time there, that was quite a while before iPhone and Androids became popular. So this was almost before the app explosion. That did very well with that. Obviously, lived through the boom of apps growing. And then we set FatFish Digital up in 2013. Predominantly initially, actually, that was built to build entertainment and game applications and building our own IP. In the game space, as you might know, so actually building and releasing and publishing your own games is a very, very difficult competitive space.
It is, yeah.
Where actually a lot of it is down to how you can market and promote your game more than necessarily maybe the quality of the game in some cases. But actually we learned a lot during that time of how to understand with analytics and data, how to view and optimize a user's journey. So obviously a lot of the games you're doing is you're really understanding, okay, if I'm marketing and getting a user into my game, how are they interacting? How am I keeping them engaged? How am I getting them coming back 24 hours later, a week later, a month later? So a lot of understanding that user engagement and optimizing, improving that, we found was through our network of people that we know is actually useful skills in a lot of consumer products. So actually if you're building a mobile app for a client or a website for a client, understanding that user engagement in a piece of technology and reporting that and optimizing it is also really important. So we saw that actually we could, sort of charge people and sort of generate money and build a business around that as well. So we pivoted quite strongly about sort of 18 months or so ago. We still do bits of games development and entertainment content now, but actually a big part of our business is really focusing on this. How do we measure and optimize user engagement?
This is quite fascinating. Already I have a few questions popping up in my head, and I'll just go ahead and ask the most pertinent.
Yes, yeah.
How do you think the team has changed? Has it changed any with this pivot from being a more games-focused company to being a more service-focused company, if that's the right way of putting that?
Yeah, because I think, like you said, it's actually quite a relatively big pivot. Because obviously, you think a lot of people, if I wanted to make games and that side of things, to making more, I think, still interesting applications. But yeah, you can see it's maybe quite different. I think a lot of our team is still the same team that we use to build games. I think, yes, there's always that passion for games there. And like I said, we still have a bit of an outlet to do that and build that. But I think a lot of people actually, a lot from our developers, in terms of building content, building sort of technology solutions, actually, if it's games or not. I think they're more interested in
I see.
the technology and the concept of building a product necessarily maybe that it's a games versus an app, etc. But yeah, it's something we've always really mindful of. Is there's obviously that underlying passion for a lot of our staff is actually building games. So I think we still do bits and pieces of that as well, and I think we always will do, even if it's just to sort of keep staff morale and staff interested and sort of happy with in terms of sort of their business role, really.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, games tend, because of the name of the business is FatFish Digital. I think an analogy is due there. I remember in the second company I've ever worked at, I did not really like the job I was doing. It was not as value added. I hoped. I was a quantitative researcher at TNS. But the funny thing was, I loved the people that I used to work with, and I always used to go by this analogy that we were the similar type of fish that came for a similar type of bait. So that was a lesson for me. To certain types of businesses and certain types of companies, and even certain types of founders, attract different types of people, and there must be a certain type of people that are attracted to games. I mean, do you think that is the case?
Yeah, I think obviously, no doubt, obviously they've got sort of a passion and interest for games, and obviously, like I really enjoy gaming in their spare time as well. But I think we've also seen actually a lot of our staff is fundamentally I think their initial passion maybe is more building products and actually delivering good products. And I think with games as well I think sometimes people external to games, or if you're telling friends and family, they think it's almost like this, I don't know how to describe it, so utopia office where people have got these foosball tables, slides, and people are just lounging around in bean bags and just
playing games all day.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, obviously we try to make a great working environment enjoyable as possible, but I think sometimes we're actually, whatever product or piece of technology you're working on, there are frustrating times, there are annoying times, and actually a game is still maybe just another product at the end of the day. So I think it's, as long as, like I said, actually the team and people you're working with is really, really important, almost bigger, for me, a bigger part of, the office environment than maybe the product. And I think a lot of people, as long as they're getting that balance right between something that's pushing them and challenge them in terms of building a piece of technology product, but equally not frustrating, I think we've had that with our team. We've seen a good transition over to people working on more app-based content than games, really.
The common denominator, I guess, is the idea of flow through psychology. This experience, which is described as the most positive experience that is on Earth for humans, is flow, as put by the psychologist Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. He had a seminal book on that, and the foundational idea is the flow is the certain point where your skills match the difficulty, the challenge of the task that is ahead of you. So games, so I'm a gamer, by the way. I'm not ashamed to say that. A few of my friends find it weird that I'm a gamer, being into all that businessy type of stuff, but I do love games. And games are very good at using that psychological machine of flow, where the missions get more and more difficult as you progress and as you build skills. So I think business is like that in many similar ways. And so do you think that has a certain place in business? Or to ask it more clearly is, I could say, do you think skill building and matching the difficulty of tasks with the right people has a place in how you manage the business?
Yes, I think in terms of games, actually, sort of you're saying there's this thing that sort of a game should be really easy to pick up but difficult to master. And I think with games, there's sort of that analogy is trying to get that balance, because if you make something really easy and quite mundane and boring, then that's obviously not great and people will leave. And actually, if you make it really difficult and really impossible to achieve, really stressful, people will leave in that way as well. So I think that's quite a good analogy you said there in terms of actually between games and sort of people management is very similar. I think if your place of work is people, I think a lot of people think actually people want to just go to work and have an easy time and no stress. But I think stress is the wrong word actually there. I think people want to get that balance. They want to be pushed in terms of some way, in terms of building out their skills, challenging themselves, but not too much in terms of they're getting burnt out and sort of, having stress problems and things like that. So I think, there's a very good analogy there in terms of trying to get that balance right in terms of the type of things that people are working on, the projects people are working on in terms of getting that. It's challenging, but it's not burning me out. It's not stressing me out. So I like that analogy.
I've just noticed. I mean, and you mentioned it as well. The first company you founded was called Bright AI. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And you mentioned you were into apps at a very early time. I could say. Mm-hmm. I mean, before it was popular. What I've noticed, speaking to lots of business owners, is that people tend to understand very well what happens when you are late to market. Obviously, you have lots of competitors. It is hard to differentiate and all that. But I don't think it is nearly well appreciated what happens, what challenges a business has when it is too early to market. What has your observations been on that?
So obviously, like I said, my first company I graduated from university in 2004, did a computer science and artificial intelligence degree. And myself and two other students or fellow students from my course decided to set up a company then. And actually, it's quite interesting you say too early to market. So as the name of that first company suggests, our first plan in a way was to sort of try to take artificial intelligence techniques out into the wide world and out to business.
And this is 2005, right? For context.
2004, yeah. So mid 2004.
Quite early.
So obviously, if people know sort of about the history of artificial intelligence over the years, obviously there's these winters and boom periods and stuff like that. And I think 2004 was just before this massive new boom period that we've hit, sort of 2010, 2012, around there. So we were probably too early to the game in terms of from that point of view, and maybe sort of a bit inexperienced, etc. as well. From the AI side, that was a big example there of actually being probably too early to this current boom. I think the reason with mobile, the reason why we were attracted to that route is at the time it was quite low barrier to entry. So we were looking at building games and things like that, and building stuff for mobile then was quite straightforward. You didn't need a sort of an expensive development console or for Microsoft or Sony or things like that. So it's actually quite easy to build stuff for mobile. And then we started to sort of build from there. So there's some clients that wanted stuff built, and then obviously the iPhone came out and that whole industry exploded from there. So I think our journey initially into mobile apps was almost actually there's a lower barrier to entry for us to get into compared to other platforms. So that's why we sort of went down that route.
Oh, I see. Looking back, so some people, the risk perception of people change with age, as they say. I mean, I've been observing a similar trend with myself. I'm 33 now. Do you think your approach to risk taking has changed since the days of Bright AI to today?
Yes, I think it has. It's hard to gauge sort of how much they've changed. And I think sometimes I've thought about that as well over the years of just what's that down to? Is it sort of circumstance? So obviously when we first started the business, we were almost for the first year or so still living that student lifestyle in a way. So we worked out of a student house. We were in the same student house we did our last year of university in. There's little or no responsibility. There's no mortgage. There's no sort of real pressure. So I don't know, does that make it easier then to take more risks because you're not having to, I need this paycheck at the end of this month to make rent and all other things. So does the circumstances of what you're surrounded of your life make it easier to take risk when you're younger versus when you're sort of older, maybe you've got family and commitments, etc. So I thought about that, and I would think maybe I have, but I don't know if that's an inevitable thing almost in a way.
That's quite interesting. I think everybody's risk perception changes, but it entirely depends on what types of experiences that they had, whether they had success or whether they had big failures. So a lot of the focus in this podcast series, as well as in many of the things what I do, many of the things I do, is try to understand how businesses evolve in terms of the systems, not just the tech stack, but also the people and culture stack as well, as they change, as they grow. Because growth can be quite painful, and it can be quite difficult at times. So I'd like to take your thoughts on how you managed growth and scaling in terms of A, the systems and technological services, the SaaS solutions you use, and B, in terms of people, organizational design and company culture. So how would you define the work rules of the culture of FatFish and how it has evolved through these years?
Yeah, so I think over the years that we've been running the business, I think sort of there's been ups and downs. So we've sort of scaled up, scaled back down, and I think we're sort of at a midpoint. So for context, we're a team of 8 at the moment, so still relatively small. I think we've been up to sort of 12, 15, and then back down. I think when we first started 3 or so. So we're sort of, I guess, at midpoint about 8, and we're looking to sort of grow the team over this year from at least maybe another couple of people. So I think in terms of sort of services and sort of tools, I think it's been sort of quite organic in terms of actually as people have joined us, or with clients or people we've worked with, what has worked well. I think we've always tried to keep lightweight tools. So even in terms of our project managing, our testing tools, etc., we've always tried to keep that sort of as streamlined and lightweight as possible in terms of sort of bug tracking, etc. I know there's sort of big tools and things like Jira and stuff like that, but we've used sort of more sort of lightweight tools, I think, in a way to just, I think, for the team to sort of reduce that sort of learning curve and that sort of overhead. So I think the tool set that we've used has just sort of evolved quite organically as we've been gone along. And I think because we've been quite small and sort of used lightweight tools, we've not necessarily been tied to a particular stack or sort of internal tools or development packages. So we've now to sort of evolve fairly quickly. So actually, if a new tool comes along or a client says, actually, we're using this, we think, okay, that's actually really good. We can evolve like that. So yeah, I think it's been quite flexible from that side. I think from the people side, then again, it's been sort of quite similar. I think as we've gone and we've sort of scaled up or scaled back down, in terms of what we've needed in terms of that resource or that people skills at the time has sort of also changed. I think it's been sort of quite organic in terms of sort of how that's grown and how we work. I would say overall we're probably quite a relaxed working environment of where we are. And I think that stems from, I don't think there's anything forced necessarily from that. I think it stems maybe from the founders, and a lot of it comes from that. But I think in terms of, I feel it's not a particularly forced, sort of culture or things like that. Yeah. It's quite a relaxed, open culture. And I think everyone's open to talking wherever you are, whether it's myself or one of the other founders or sort of developers. I think everyone's pretty much open to talking to everyone on the same level, really.
It's really interesting how businesses evolve at different life stages. Through the interviews and conversations I'm trying to have with business owners, I'm trying to see some patterns, some milestones that really change the structure of the business. So, for example, 23 to 25 in terms of number of staff seems to be an inflection point where the businesses either have to evolve or they fail. A similar point seems to be around 50 people. A few days ago in an event, somebody mentioned a quite clear and to be honest, a very intelligent way of looking at when a company would need culture and people decisions. And that point is the people recruited in by the founding team are in turn making recruitment decisions on behalf of the company. So that's at that point, so culture seems to be that thing that carries what that business, who that business is, what's the personality of that company. Yeah. But before that, it's usually too early, and it can be an reflection of the values of the working style of the founders. So with regards to that, is it something that is talked out in the open in your company culture? I mean, do you have a written list of values, or do you talk about these, or is it just part of that organic unspoken code of conduct that is within the company? Which one is true in your case?
And I think, sorry, actually going back to that, you sort of saying those milestones as well. I think for me personally, and I don't know if it's the same for anyone else, is there was also a very, very, very early milestone is actually almost taking on the first proper employee in a way. So obviously when you start your business, is maybe in our case, it was myself and two other fellow founders and directors that were sort of also on my university course. So I think actually the first person you take on outside of that group is also a bit of a milestone, because I think initially you all sort of trust each other in a way, you're sort of in it together. Actually, if you have a bad month, maybe you could sacrifice a bit of salary, etc., if you need to. But I think that first person you take out is sort of I don't know, outsider seems too much of as a wrong word to say, but actually it's the first person you're bringing in to sort of listen to your and take on your culture and your vision and believe in the direction you're going in as well. So I think there's also that first step as well that we found, or me personally found.
Sorry to interrupt, but when you work with someone that you've already known, there's a certain credit to that relationship, and even if you make a mistake, you got room to recover. However, when you're just hiring somebody that you don't know, you have to build that credit as well, in a sense.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So then in terms of going sort of back to your question, in terms of sort of how our our environment and things evolved. Again, it was very organic. I think over the years we have tried to write down in terms of what is our company ethos, what are our beliefs, etc. And I think I just found it was quite a bit forced in terms of sort of doing that. I think for us it's actually always just come around quite organically. And I think when we've interviewed people or people have joined us, we've sort of, I think it's quite organically how in terms of, I think the company's brands have sort of come across. I think as we maybe get bigger and it's actually, so taking a step back there, at the moment, a lot of sort of pretty much all the hiring, interview, etc. is done by one of the founders. So I think as you're saying, as you get bigger where it's actually our employees or employing people, I think it gets even more important then, because obviously it's them that sort of looking for people based off our company brands, and maybe documenting it and implementing it further there might be very important. But at the moment, it's been quite an organic sort of process, I think, in terms of how we've worked with our staff on that.
I think there's real value in what you've just said, in the sense that I found that very honest and very true. When a company has reached a certain size, they have to make use of documents and maybe writings on the wall to tell what their culture is about. But when you're an organization of 10, 15 people, you have the founders to do that. I mean, the founders, the core team should be there to build that relationship. It doesn't hurt to have it somewhere written, but that's not what it's about at the end of the day, is it? It's about establishing connections and doing work together. That actually is the best method to introduce your way of doing business in that company, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're sort of at that point where, like I said, with the size we are, it might be sort of a few hires time that we need to sort of be instigating and, employing those methodologies more. I think there are bits and pieces as we go, sort of as I've learned to maybe even in the next hires that I'd like to do, even simple things like at the moment on the first day for a new hire, the induction and the introduction to our offices and all those sort of things is done by myself. I think I've seen that some companies, I like it quite a way, is actually that's done by the last person that was hired in a way. So I think something like that is just quite nice in terms of both for the last hire, but also the new person in terms of actually, okay, they'll give maybe a better overview and a more warts and all sort of story of introduction of everything. So I think even things like that, where we might not document our first sort of company sort of ethos and brand and everything like that, I just think small things like that I would maybe like to start doing for sort of the next hires, just to as we grow. I think just things like that would be quite interesting and useful to do.
Turning our focus for a second to the more commercial side of things, I'm really curious about what you use as your main customer acquisition channel, in terms of marketing or sales, and how it works generally. What works well for your case?
Yeah, so I think in terms of particularly now with the type of work that we're doing, and particularly a lot of the stuff, and we're doing things in sort of well-being and healthcare space. A lot of our our sales work is done via either recommendation, word of mouth, or quite tailored sort of targeting in terms of particular target sort of clients, because there's quite a lot of trust in terms of the clients and the project side that we're building. So it's a lot of repeat business. There's a lot of recommendation. We've got quite a big network of people that we've done work for over the past. So a lot of the work comes from that side. Because I think the type of solutions that we're building is a relatively bigger budget projects that, for most people, the clients we're working with, their main concern is, can you deliver a good quality product to us necessarily than sort of cost. So it's a lot more of a personal relationship that we have with sort of trying to win and get this type of work.
And that's fantastic. So what's your take on cold emails or cold calls? Do you enjoy receiving them?
It depends who it's from. So
I mean, the default answer starts as no for many people, but you do not say no straight away, so that's a good sign.
I think in terms of, I've seen some quite, not aggressive, but overly. So if you send me a cold email and then 24 hours later you send a chase up, I think that's maybe a bit too aggressive. Is actually, there's probably, I'm not maybe digested that. I've had some people that, for a lot of ad agencies and maybe some recruitment agencies, that are quite aggressive in terms of the amount of emails they send, and quite weird emails as well, to be honest, in terms of trying to hook you in. So I think generally I'm not against it. I'll look at it, I'll either delete it or file it or stuff like that, because I think I'm always want to learn something. So there might be something interesting, or I might drop it into an archive folder or something. So it might be something relevant for me in the future. I think what mainly annoys me are cold emails if I'm basically getting quite aggressively harassed over a number of weeks by multiple emails. I think that's more annoying than anything else.
I agree with that 100%. There's a certain balance to that, and it's a very difficult balance to strike. I was just listening to a YC, Y Combinator sales conference on cold mails and on that topic generally. So there seems to be lots of different opinions on that. But I think the most important part is really being specific to your client and understand. And the reason why I digressed to cold calls and cold emails is that you mentioned lots of relationships and customer acquisitions that you've generated are built upon referrals and already existing. And so this is like a catch 22. So where it's going to start, right? So that's why. I jumped to the cold email, cold call topic, and there seems to be a balance there, but it's a really difficult balance. So what do you think are the best type of cold emails, cold calls that you think has worked with you, or that you've witnessed being used?
So I think actually, like you said, is actually making sure it's targeting to particular companies. So I can see why you've emailed this to me. Or some quick bullet point snapshots of why your product is useful, why is it targeted to me. I think something useful like that is very good to see. I think if it's just sort of these blanket emails where even if there's mistakes in there where they've not populated, because obviously you can auto populate first name and stuff like that if it just says hello first name or stuff like that. I think it's a bit OCD, but maybe things like that annoy me quite a lot. But I think it's but yeah, I think it is just making sure that it's quite to the point, and I can look at it and say, okay, even if I'm not particularly interested, I can see why you've sent that to me now. I might file it and look at it at a later date. I think for me, that's the main thing from a cold email.
That's very interesting. Something I'm really curious about. So I don't have a technical background. I haven't written a line of code. But I'm observing a trend in which lots of new businesses, platforms, and companies are popping up in the space of what I can best describe as self-service application development platforms. One example I know is bubble.is. Another one is Thunktable. So looking at the future of the business or of the general industry of development, be it in mobile or other platforms, What do you think these kind of platforms, what kind of a role do you think they will play in the future?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's obviously like these no-code solutions and things like that. So I think our experience from them, particularly when we've been speaking to clients and things like that, is that a lot of them will take you so far in terms of actually there's quite a broad set of functionality that probably people would want to say, okay, if I'm building a mobile app, I'm building a website, here's the things that I probably will want into it. There might be an e-commerce solution, there might be galleries, there might be authentication, all those sort of things.
Yeah.
So I think stuff like that's fine. I think what we've typically found is actually, particularly the clients that we're dealing with, if you want to get a sort of stray outside of those, so you either want to customize that or you want to write quite bespoke functionality for things, then that's where I guess those sort of platform sort of falls down. And I think there's this sort of middle ground in a way, which is the sort of ideally code once, run anywhere sort of platforms like React Native, Native Script, those sort of things. So you write in some sort of platform agnostic language, JavaScript, something like that, and then you can actually build out to iOS, you can build out to Android, and if you really need to, then you can write pure native code as well if you need to write specific functionality at sort of a lower level. So I think tools like that will probably already are, but will continue to become prevalent. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of complexity. I think if I look at some of the things that we're working on, and I still look at it and think in 2019, this seems way overly complex to be doing way of doing stuff. This must be an easier way to do this in the future. So I think things will get simpler and probably open to more people, but I think there will still be those different technologies, new technologies, or quite bespoke requirements that will need some level of skill to be able to do.
It's going to balance out eventually. But I mean, it's really brutal for developers and technology people, isn't it? Because it has been advertised as the occupation of the future, that people should invest, and you obviously having been taught AI as well, you should know it firsthand. But the half-life of the development skills, and I mean, it's just brutal. If you spent 2 years in a cave, many of the technical skills that you've held need a tremendous amount of updating or restudying, and languages constantly change. We've been talking about a close friend of mine on React Native and how it's becoming popular, but I remember that not being the case just 2-3 years ago. So technology is kind of eating itself, and it's quite brutal for the people who are involved. What do you think about that?
But yeah, I don't know. Is that a general trend anyway now in not just in technology coding, in all industry? Is actually I think when in the day where you front loaded all your education, you learned everything you needed up to 20 or whatever it was, and then you went on and did a career that you used that education for the rest of your life. I think that's gone now. That's not the case. I think the chances are is everyone's probably going to be reskilling and learning throughout their whole life now. And actually spending those first 20 or so years front weighting your education is probably not going to be the way it's going to be. And I think technology probably is an extreme of that because of how quickly things move. Actually, if you think about it, just over 10 years ago, less than 15 years ago, was being an app developer, a mobile app developer, a career? Not really. There was like we were doing. There were some people building little J2ME apps and things like that, but it wasn't particularly probably a career as it is now. And so if you think in another 10 years, 15 years time, what sort of jobs will there be? And I think that holds true for every industry. Is a lot of job titles will die, but probably quite a few will be created as well. Is you think there's YouTuber influencers now, 20 years ago would there be that would be I know it's quite a small a small slice of people do that, but would that have been a job title 20 years ago? No. So I think technology is a prime example of how things quickly move. But I think that reskilling and educating and continuously learning is an industry-wide thing, not just necessarily technology.
I mean, this really worries me. I gotta say, look, in the past, just 30, 40 years ago, you would go out, pick a profession, study that, and then, okay, you are set. You had to be good at your job, but I mean, that would be enough. But now you got to be good at your job. You got to be learning very fast. But not only that, you got to also have the vision to see the future, because the shelf life of occupations have become shorter than our professional careers, right? So you have to, as you said, you have to have a multiple cyclical periods of learning and reinventing. And in that sense, being successful is less about being being good at what you do is still very, very important, but it's just not only about that, but at the same time, understanding future and trying to grab a piece of that future has become everybody's concern, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think also for me as well, as sort of a concern is I think people are going to be continuously learning throughout their lives, and actually their resources, their source of learning is going to be a lot more decentralized. So it might not be necessarily from everyone going to a brick and mortar university. It'll be learning online and courses online, which is great. My main concern is that we just need to make sure that these sources of education or learning, there is some sort of validity to it. There's some checking of it. Is obviously particularly for learning to code any particular language, you can go to YouTube and find millions of videos to teach you JavaScript or those sort of things. But in coding and development, there's right ways to do stuff and there's lots of wrong ways to do things. And in most cases, it probably won't be a problem. But when actually you're trying to reuse code or share code between a team of people, or it's being used in quite a performant way, is actually doing stuff in the right way is important. So who's actually the authority on teaching people to do stuff the right way? Where actually anyone could go to make a YouTube video teaching you JavaScript, but are they the right person to be teaching it? So I think that's going to be quite important, is how do we monitor these learning centers to be skilling people in the right way?
It's much about choosing the right direction as much as about running in that direction. A recent debate I've been a part of in Reddit, of all places, was should graduates jump into building a startup, or should they get some enterprise work experience first? What's your take on that?
It's a different one. So I've not really ever worked for a company. I've done bits of summer jobs and things like that. But yeah, I've only just worked for my own company since I graduated, really. So I'm a bit biased in terms of one way. In hindsight, would have gone, but I don't think I'm going to change now. But in terms of in hindsight, I think I can definitely see there's a benefit to going to work for a bigger company or an established company to learn some of the ropes and some of the processes and various things like that. So yeah, would I recommend one way or the other? I think I was in a lucky position to be able to sort of do that and start that straight out of university. So I don't think there's any right or wrong way, but I could definitely see some really good benefits for getting some experience in an established larger company.
It's a really difficult question. I'm just trying to be empathetic to the people trying to make that decision, and it's really quite a tough one because you gotta calculate the opportunity cost of each, right? It's very difficult. It's very complex.
And I think for me as well, is interesting is when we graduated, we were pretty proficient at technology and how to write code, but everything else in terms of how to sort of start and run a business, we had no clue whatsoever. And in terms of tax, accounting, what insurance do you need, what employment documentation do you need, shareholders agreements, all those sort of things. And I think now there's a lot more resource out there now, but still it's a bit of a minefield in terms of sort of navigating your way around that. So actually maybe getting some experience in another business and maybe where you can get a bit more of an understanding of how companies are organized and those other skills that you need could be a real benefit.
That's true. So thank you for being a part of this session. I mean, certainly you have a unique perspective in the sense that you've built a business right out of college and been successful doing that, been early to market, built a team, seen a scale-up period as well as a scale-down period, and You've persevered through that all, so I think that's really valuable. So before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to add for the ideal types of clients who should reach out to FatFish Digital, and what are some of the best channels to get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, like I said, we're building stuff for mobile apps and sort of web as well. So I think typically a lot of the content, the products we're building are consumer focused. If there's some sort of technical challenge or some data understanding or some user engagement challenge there as well, I think typically I wouldn't say if you're just looking for a standard website or standard app to be built, that's probably not for us. I think we're looking for stuff actually if there's more of a complex challenge there, understanding of data, understanding that user journey. That's the sort of projects that we're working on with our clients and interested in. In terms of sort of places to get in touch with us, obviously a really good place to start, and it's got some examples of our work, is our website, fatfishdigital.co.uk. You can also reach out to me on Twitter as well, where I'm David M. Lane, M for Mark Lane. But yeah, I think on the website it's got some good examples of our work and a way to get in touch with us.
Are we friends on Twitter? Not yet, I guess.
I don't think we are. No, so we probably should be. Yeah.
Okay, I'll change that in a second. Thank you very much for being a guest. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Great, thanks for the invite. It was really good. Enjoyed it.